a fair amount of training dollars, capital dollars, changing in machinery and equipment and the like, for you to be coming up to world-class standards. And I don't know, you probably have experience with that for sure.
Well, it's I think in capital goods it's a little bit different in that most of the global competitors have fairly standard or similar levels of quality. I would say as we see capital goods coming from developing countries, still in the equipment business, there are economies which are prepared to take the trade-off between quality and first cost. Certainly that might be a way to enter the market, to go into areas where they're not prepared to pay for world-class quality yet. But at the same time, you have to be raising your standards so that when you have the base in place outside your own country, you have that to go forward into the higher quality areas and usually higher price business.
And the market will be a better teacher than anything else, is whether you're acceptable or have an acceptable product or not, or plans otherwise.
We are greeting now Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas, and this is a university from Tamaulipas. Good morning. How do you include the new products in a culture that is used to dealing with a monopoly product?
Why don't you have fun with that?
That's a very difficult issue. The difficult part of it comes from the infrastructure of the retailers, the wholesalers, the distribution people, and of course the government. The easy part of it comes from the consumers. One of the things that makes the globalization of the marketplace really wonderful is that consumers have access to a large variety of products and of quality products. And when consumers vote, they vote with their dollars, or they vote with their dineros or their cruzeros, and very quickly the standards move up to the ones that are the more preferred products, the ones that are better quality products. And very quickly some of the monopolization of the market begins to get shaken up, and it shifts out for itself quite easily. It's just the sort of teenage years, that sort of adolescent period of fighting with the parents in the monopoly to the globalization period.
I think we're suffering from that right now in terms of opening the telecommunications markets.
Yes.
A number of the smaller markets are somewhat reluctant, really, to try to let the big British telecoms and the various Baby Bells and AT&T kind of get on their turf.
Right.
Now this question is coming from Celaya, Guanajuato, Mexico. The question is, could you explain to us what strategies we should use in order to make our administrators aware of the importance of education and training in this new globalization culture?
Expose them to their own ignorance, I suppose, would be one part of it. Go on.
It's a very difficult task to do, and much like with the consumers beginning to see more products in their market, it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It kind of spirals around. Perhaps one of the best models is the country of Chile, which had a very tightly controlled marketplace for a very long time, strict government constraints. And when they began to realize what could happen if they opened the marketplace, the economy has blossomed, there is a rising middle class, and there are many people who are looking to send their administrators, their enterprise and business operators to Chile to basically study how to globalize, how to open the market very quickly. So there are lots of models you can look at. You can look at things that Thailand is doing, things that South Korea is doing. They have been very successful in the past. And it's a difficult thing because what happens is the administrators have to realize that power is not always the most desirable part of this, but sometimes economic growth is, because that has benefits for everyone. But it's not easy.
Do you want to add anything to that? Do you have any examples where that might have been a problem?
No, I would say that I wouldn't expect there's a lot of difference between fostering change in an academic environment versus an industrial one. And what we have found is there must be a champion.
Right.
and that champion has to truly believe and have a passion for the change, as well as be prepared to take some personal risk in being a champion for a changing cause.
And now we're going back to Venezuela. We're going to the Central University in Venezuela, Caracas. Thank you very much for this opportunity that you are offering us. And our question is the following. The first one is, globalization must take into account all the integration, the mechanisms, the regional mechanisms. What would be your recommendations? And another question, what are the features? What of a finished product, what should the product have in order to satisfy consumers?
I don't know if there's really one answer to all that. I think that in part you're going to have to study that particular region and that particular market and really try to understand in terms of what they need to do. I think going back to your talk, you can't use an American expression, peanut butter spread everything the same way and expect to come up with a global strategy. You may have to come up with an individual strategy for each individual country or region and really in order to be successful, however arduous that might sound.
And now we have another call from Mexico, once again, the Hispano-American University, National Autonomous University in Mexico, Coacalco, Mexico State. Thank you. What recommendations would you make? What would you say to a company who is just starting in the global market? What recommendations do you have for them?
Be prepared for the long haul. Don't do it with a short-term objective, because very few companies are initially well positioned for early success. That's why I go back to my comment on you must have leadership with a vision who are in it for the long haul.
I think some companies tend to almost do international stuff almost by accident. Yes. And that they come up with an opportunity for whatever incidental reasons without a lot of forethought. And I think you should take advantage of that. But to continue on with kind of an accidental strategy, if you will, in the long run, I don't think is really going to be successful. If you've had some accidental successes, I think you need to learn from those, but not blindly apply what you've done all over the place. That might not necessarily succeed the whole time.
And now we are coming to Mexico again. This is coming from Cuautitlan, another call from the University of Mexico. Dr. Olson, what happens with the transfer prices with regard to NAFTA?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean in terms of what happens to them. If you are within the NAFTA group or for a country who is outside NAFTA. If you are within the NAFTA group, the transfer prices are really relatively minor in terms of events that occur. Probably the most desirable thing is for those of you who are not part of NAFTA, although being South American, I know there's a lot of countries who are sort of looking at joining the World Trade Organization. There are distinct advantages to participating with a NAFTA country because in moving the product from one country to another, and you have to remember, the NAFTA countries are very different from many other regional trading groups in that we have countries at very different stages of economic development. There's really only one other regional trading group like that around the world in Southeast Asia. So what you have to realize is which country is the best to bring the product in, especially if there's any assembly, any packaging, any processing that's going to have to go on within the NAFTA organization. Because to sell the product in the United States or in Canada can be a very lucrative output, especially if the product has been processed in Mexico. For instance, I think the number is something like 50% of all television sets are assembled, worldwide television sets, whether it's a European company, Japanese, Korean, American, are assembled in Tijuana. So virtually half of the people in the world are watching a television set that has been put together in one city. because the transfer pricing works very much in that favor, because the labor cost in Mexico is much, much lower than it would be in the United States and far lower than it would be in Canada. And I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to continue with Module 3, in which Mr. Barr will explain to us the methodology of how to enter into the global market arena, citing examples from his company, Solar Turbines.
Thank you, Armando. It is certainly a pleasure to have this opportunity to participate in today's program. There is undoubtedly an accelerating rate of change occurring in the global business environment. A pessimist might view this trend as a threat, while an internationalist would view it as an opportunity. It depends on one's perspective. However, ignoring the rapid pace of change can be catastrophic for any business. I have found that every market niche is eventually accessible, and there is always a competitor who wants to take your place. Standing still isn't an option, nor is running scared. What's the best defense? View change as the opportunity to expand your business and to differentiate yourself from competitors. Aggressively embrace change as an opportunity to learn to manage, to mitigate the risk. The ability of an organization to anticipate or quickly identify change and take appropriate action can be a sustainable source of competitive advantage. To put my comments on the global market in perspective, a few words about Solar Turbines would be appropriate. We are a San Diego company whose origin dates back to 1927. Solar Turbines has been a wholly owned subsidiary of Caterpillar since 1981. We design, manufacture, install, operate, and maintain industrial combustion gas turbine systems in the 1 to 11 megawatt range. Solar is a team of 4,900 people, of whom about 700 are located outside the United States. We maintain legal entities in 13 countries outside the United States and have 9,600 equipment installations in 83 countries. Annual revenues exceed $1 billion, and more than 75% of our manufactured product is exported from the United States. On an annual basis, we provide more than 50% of the turbo machinery equipment purchased globally in our power range. Our customers are oil and gas companies, industrial cogenerators, small electric power producers, and marine operators. There are several factors which are transforming our markets in the energy industry. First, the harmonization of trade regulations. We are in the golden age of free trade. The increase in the number of trade organizations and of trade agreements, such as the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, the Andean Pact, Mercosur, the ASEAN Conference, and others, are opening borders and promoting global commerce. The privatization of state organizations, the move towards free markets and private enterprise, has created tremendous opportunities for cross-border cooperation and investments. It has encouraged migration of capital for development of stagnant or slow-moving economies. Another factor is regional economic integration and cross-border cooperation. As economic ideologies converge, financial benefit has promoted cooperation between governments where both parties benefit and agendas are aligned. Cross-border cooperation in energy and pipeline projects has stimulated investment and accelerated GDP growth in cooperating countries, such as the Trans-Andean Pipeline, the Bolivia-Brazil Pipeline, and the Myanmar-Thailand Pipeline. These projects will generate employment and a rise in the general living standards in these cooperating countries. The global mobility of capital. The worldwide demand for capital has heightened competition and created the opportunity for investors to select the best rates of return in the safest business environments. This has stimulated trade, accelerated development, and improved the general standard of living in developing countries. The breakup of the former Soviet Union has also played a role in transforming our markets. It has provided tremendous potential markets and economies of the future. while the path isn't clear today, these countries will eventually become safe havens for investment and a source of highly educated workers for industrial ventures. The final factor has been a change in customer-supplier alliances. The business value chain has become global as suppliers and users are more integrated in their approach to business. This has moved commerce out of our home countries, but within the comfort of existing business relationships. Recognizing the sustained shift of business outside the United States, executive management at Solar decided in 1994 that an organizational realignment was required to accelerate a shift from a centralized U.S. export firm to a globally oriented enterprise. Solar had traditionally been a functionally oriented ex-works organization. Our success had been the product of strong focus on the customer, a systems approach to satisfying the customer's requirements, and a very competitive cost base. We felt that sustained success would require building on our current strengths by enhancing our focus on our non-U.S. customers and developing a more self-directed international presence combined with a support structure which was second to none in our industry. This shift in organizational alignment required several major initiatives to be successful. First, greater authority delegation to international locations in order to provide improved responsiveness and enhanced execution of the business. A decentralized approach to authority delegation and decision-making is mandatory. A new policy was developed which passed greater levels of authority to international locations, along with the burden to share information and accountability for results. Second, enhanced IS systems with a greater level of authority to make decisions, access to real-time, accurate information necessary to make good decisions was imperative. An upgrade and enhancement of the existing IS system was required. With the new systems and security in place, we began providing access for key international managers to sensitive commercial and technical information. Third, preparing the organization for new responsibilities. The international organization is now being asked to assume greater responsibility for business outcomes and to make difficult decisions involving balanced judgment where trade-offs are required. These skills, which previously weren't developed, are now required. We have established a more focused training and development program. Fourth, ongoing communication of the change in organizational priorities. Changing a business culture is never easy. Studies have shown that between 5 to 6 years are required to institutionalize change. This is the challenge of executive management, to walk the talk, to maintain the priority for change, to reinforce through ongoing, consistent communication the benefits and the need for change. Now let's talk about the use of country strategies. What is the purpose of a country strategy? To enhance competitive position, to provide a stronger defensive posture, and to gain access to markets, technology, or a lower cost structure. How does one develop a country or a regional strategy? First, estimate the size of the opportunity or the threat. Is it worth the effort, the investment, or the cost? Then, evaluate the nature of various in-country legal presence or collaborations to establish which best fits your requirements, such as a local distribution, a licensee, a joint venture, subsidiary, or others. Next, evaluate local potential partners. This may be the most critical factor in the success of your local strategy. The right partner or advisor will allow you to avoid the typical learning curve mistakes that can frustrate or lead to the failure of your initiative. Assess the objectives of the various stakeholders. A successful strategy must be a win-win for all parties. Identify potential areas of conflict. These will always be present. It's better to address them up front and have contingency plans. Hidden agendas will always lead to problems. Finally, develop a business plan for the entity, which includes operating cost and tax exposure. Investment and the application of resources requires financial return. A plan will also allow you to monitor the success of your strategy or identify the need for adjustment. As an example of a country strategy, I'd like to share the path Solar has taken in Indonesia. Solar's involvement in Indonesia dates to 1973. The first project was with the Joint Production Sharing Contractor, or PSC, Arco Indonesia. As a PSC, their partner is the government of Indonesia. If we review the stakeholders' objectives at that time, they were rather simple. Arco and the Indonesian government wanted to generate revenue by quickly producing oil, and Solar wanted to sell equipment to accomplish that goal. The country strategy was equally uncomplex: to work with an in-country representative to maintain local interface with the government and the PSC, export equipment, and support it by sending specialists as required. However, business situations seldom stay the same, and effective country strategies must evolve as the environment dictates. Once a significant oil production base was established, the expectations and the objectives of Arco and the Indonesian government expanded. The government wanted to promote the development of local business and employment, and Arco wanted service support closer to their operating base. To meet these objectives, Solar evaluated and selected a local firm to be its in-country dealer in 1985. While this didn't involve an investment, it did require a transfer of technology through the training of local national employees and the secondment of specialists to the dealer's organization. By 1986, the government increased its desire to expand the technology base in Indonesia and develop more high-tech jobs. It improved and streamlined the process of goods importation, making it easier for foreign firms to move material across the border and consider operating within Indonesia. However, joint venture regulations weren't reformed. These onerous regulations and challenging tax laws made Solar equity participation in an Indonesian operation unattractive. The only economically feasible approach was to identify and select a local company as a technology licensee to provide in-country repair and overhaul support. In selecting a licensee, we evaluated several Indonesian companies. We selected the firm IPTN, which is part of the government's technology infrastructure and operates a large aero-turbine repair center. Working with the potential licensee, and a business plan was developed which justified their investment and our technology and training effort. We will be celebrating the 10-year anniversary of this very successful relationship in March of this year. This collaboration has provided revenue for IPTN and significant differentiation for Solar and greater visibility within the government, reinforcing our preferred position. As operations expanded and further investments and assets were required, Solar evaluated the potential benefits of establishing a joint venture company. Changes in JV regulations in 1995 made the process feasible. We reached agreement with our long-standing dealer principals to join us in the JV, which began operations in September of 1996. Considerable study of legal entity and tax regulations, the registration process, and the necessary levels of investment were undertaken to prepare a business plan for the joint venture. The establishment of a joint venture has strengthened our position with both our customers and the host government, improved our operating efficiencies, and enhanced our customer support. At the current moment, all stakeholders have benefited, a win-win situation. However, future changes in the region are anticipated with the strengthening of the ASEAN conference. We are already assessing its implications and how best to integrate our other operations in the region. I hope this Indonesian example illustrates two key points. First, the changing business environment requires constant monitoring, and country strategies must be adjusted accordingly to be relevant and effective. And second, as the business environment matures, country strategies become more complex and involved. As modern communications and logistics shrink the world, as trade barriers fall, and as enterprises seek to expand their horizons, they must transform their organizations and their thinking to take on a global orientation. Success isn't determined by size, but by leadership's vision, the ability to embrace change and diversity, to accept the logic of another's culture, and to adopt more quickly than your competitor. Decentralized decision-making, empowerment, organizational development, and country strategies are just elements of the journey. Each enterprise must chart its own course, and I wish all of you a successful voyage to your desired business objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. And now we are going to continue with the second question and answer session. The following question is coming from the Polytechnical Institute from Mexico, Federal District. Yes, go ahead. Thank you very much for the opportunity you're giving me to ask this question. I would like to ask you if in this globalization strategy you have considered that the American model does have a lot of environmental hazards and threats, and that in an environment where we have a lot of marketing wars and a lot of bribes, why don't we use people who are specialized and who have experience abroad for them to be intermediaries rather than what they have what has happened, that the people who leaves their own country, they end up leaving the principles and working in a different way.
We have always taken an approach to try to localize our foreign organizations as quickly as possible, both through the involvement of local individuals as joint venture partners, as well as the hiring, the training, and the development of local nationals to staff our organizations. We think that if you don't do this, it's almost impossible to have an organization that is culturally attuned and effective in dealing with foreign nationalities and markets. I don't know if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I understand that the Japanese are having a difficulty really going from, if you will, to use the terms, from an international organization to a global organization, and actually giving greater delegation of authority to their local partners in terms of what they're wanting to do. So it's not an easy transition to try to do. I was involved with one particular petrochemical company where this was an issue. Not only was it a matter of the issue of the company wanting to do that, the question is whether the locals were technically competent in their own particular field sufficiently to take over the operation. And they're having an ongoing discussion even now in that particular circumstance, and what the right balance is in trying to achieve trying to take as many local people as possible and put them in positions of power.
And now we're going to Morelos. The question is coming from the Technological Institute, Zacatepec, Morelos. And thank you very much. And from our beautiful country of Morelos, we would like to send you our greetings. And we have a question for you. We would like to find out what happens when you have a market who is in financial and economic crisis. Do you know what happens with the consumer toward quality? What is the consumer's attitude toward quality when they are in a crisis market?
Is that for maybe Dr. Olson, or is that?
I'm not sure what you mean by a crisis market.
When their economies are in crises, in a financial economic, when the economy has collapsed, what does the consumer actually do vis-a-vis quality? Will they just settle for a lower quality because they just can't afford a higher quality? Is that what happens?
That would be my guess, but what's your experience?
I guess what I have seen in most marketplaces is there is a very subtle conditioning that takes place, and this is one of both the benefits for the consumer and difficulties for the marketer coming out of globalization. We very quickly become accustomed to quality, and it's very difficult to go back. If you've been using a better product, if you've been using one that the performance is really excellent, it's very difficult to cut back. What tends to happen more is the better product